What happens when movies go too far for their own time? The 1970s pushed cinema to the edge, sometimes right over it. Directors weren't chasing awards. They were testing how much audiences could handle before storming out. Studios panicked, countries banned them, and fans whispered their titles like forbidden secrets. These weren't just movies. They were cinematic detonations. Let's count down 14 brutal exploitation films from the 70s that shocked the world and got erased for daring to exist. Number 14. Pink Flamingos, 1972. Only one movie ever claimed to be the filthiest film alive, and meant it. John Waters' Pink Flamingos was the kind of cinematic rebellion no studio wanted to admit existed. Shot for a few $1,000s in Baltimore, it followed Divine, a larger-than-life underground icon, battling rivals for the crown of pure depravity. It wasn't about glamour, it was about chaos. Audiences didn't just watch this film, they survived it. From improvised scenes to public indecency that stunned even the cast, Pink Flamingos mocked every moral standard of its era. Censors in Canada, Australia, and the United Kingdom banned it, immediately calling it unfit for public release. Yet bootleg copies spread like wildfire through midnight screenings, turning it into a badge of rebellion. What makes Pink Flamingos legendary isn't just its shock, it's its attitude. Waters wasn't chasing art. He was holding up a cracked mirror to polite society and laughing. Decades later, that same movie now sits in the U.S. National Film Registry beside The Godfather. The Outlaw became a classic. Number 13. Caligula, 1979. Imagine starting with a serious historical epic and ending with one of the most chaotic productions in movie history. That's Caligula. Conceived as a drama about ancient Rome, it had a script by Gore Vidal, direction by Tinto Brass, and a cast stacked with stars: Malcolm McDowell, Helen Mirren, Peter O'Toole. Then the producer decided it wasn't wild enough. He secretly filmed extra scenes without the actors' consent and re-edited the entire movie into something far more provocative. When it hit theaters, audiences were stunned. Critics called it unwatchable. Others called it brilliant madness. Countries like Canada and Australia banned it outright, and European nations sliced it to pieces before allowing screenings. The budget ballooned to over $17 million, an insane amount for an independent film at the time. And yet, the outrage made it a box office hit in the United States, earning more than $20 million despite the bans. Caligula remains a cinematic cautionary tale. What happens when power, ego, and art collide? Behind the chaos, though, there's a strange genius. An ambitious look at corruption that ended up being consumed by its own spectacle. Number 12. In the Realm of the Senses, 1976. Few films have walked the line between art and outrage like this one. Directed by Nagisa Oshima. In the Realm of the Senses told a true story from 1930s, Tokyo. An obsession that spiraled out of control. It was meant to explore human emotion and fixation, but censors only saw danger. Japan refused to process the film, forcing Oshima to ship the negatives overseas just to get it developed. When the movie finally premiered, authorities immediately banned it at home. Customs officers in America seized copies under obscenity laws, sparking a long legal fight that made headlines worldwide. Despite all the resistance, In the Realm of the Senses found its audience in European art houses, earning critical praise for its daring realism. It wasn't exploitative for shock's sake, it was using honesty to make viewers uncomfortable. Roger Ebert once said it was an art film made for a nation of voyeurs. Years later, the movie became required viewing in film schools, a strange twist for a work once considered illegal. It proved that censorship can't erase conversation, it only makes people more curious. Number 11. Women in Cellblock 9, 1978. If you want to understand how far exploitation cinema could go, look no further than Women in Cellblock 9, directed by Jess Franco. The king of Grindhouse shock, this film was part of the infamous women in prison craze that dominated 70s exploitation theaters. It was filmed on a shoestring budget in Switzerland, using abandoned military buildings as makeshift sets. The story followed a group of female prisoners trapped in a brutal jungle detention camp. No glamour, no fantasy, just relentless hardship. Franco stripped the plot to the bone, leaving only discomfort and raw tension. When British censors reviewed it, they didn't hesitate. The film was banned outright, cited for inhumane and degrading scenes. Italy followed, and the movie never received an official uncut release in several countries. Ironically, the more the world tried to suppress it, the more it became a cult legend. Bootlegs circulated through underground collectors, and by the 2000s it had resurfaced as a case study in artistic limits. Franco himself later admitted he made it to cash in fast, but even he didn't expect it to become one of the most infamous banned films ever made. Number 10. Love Camp 7, 1969, widely released in the 70s. Before the world had ever heard of Ilsa, she-wolf of the SS, there was Love Camp 7. This grim low-budget production laid the groundwork for an entire subgenre that would define the darker side of exploitation cinema. Set in a wartime prison camp, the story focused on two undercover agents posing as inmates to gather intelligence. What followed was a grim portrait of cruelty wrapped in the aesthetics of grindhouse filmmaking. When it reached European censors in the 70s, they didn't just cut it, they outlawed it entirely. The United Kingdom kept it banned for decades under the Obscene Publications Act, and Germany refused to certify it at all. Even when DVDs became popular, Love Camp 7 remained one of the rare titles you couldn't buy legally in most countries. Despite its rough production values and almost non-existent budget, it influenced dozens of later movies that tried to match its audacity. It wasn't a good movie by any normal standard, but it changed the boundaries of what low-budget cinema could get away with and what it absolutely couldn't. Number 9. Snuff, 1975. No exploitation movie caused more public chaos than Snuff. It started life as a cheap horror flick shot in Argentina under the title Slaughter, but it gathered dust on a shelf for years until an American distributor saw an opportunity. He added a new ending that looked like a real killing on camera and promoted it as the film that could only be made in South America, where life is cheap. That slogan alone ignited a storm. Audiences panicked. Protesters gathered outside theaters demanding arrests. Police raided screenings, and the FBI even got involved. Rumors spread that it was a real recording of violence, not a staged scene. But of course, it wasn't real. The distributors had staged the finale using actors knowing the controversy would sell tickets. And it did. Made for barely $40,000, Snuff grossed more than $1 million. Yet, it was banned in several cities and labeled obscene in the United Kingdom, where it stayed outlawed until the early 2000s. Feminist groups denounced it, critics called it immoral, but the publicity only amplified its legend. In hindsight, Snuff wasn't just a film. It was a marketing trick that changed how people thought about movie violence. It proved that sometimes the rumor is more powerful than the reality. Number 8. Witchfinder General, reissued in the 1970s. Vincent Price was already a horror icon when he took on Witchfinder General, but nothing prepared audiences for the level of cruelty this movie unleashed. Set during England's witch trials, it followed a corrupt magistrate who used accusations to terrorize entire villages. What made it shocking wasn't monsters or magic, it was the realism. Director Michael Reeves filmed the violence with cold precision. No fantasy, no exaggeration. When the film premiered, censors demanded major cuts, but even edited it left audiences shaken. Britain's critics called it sadistic and disturbing, and some theaters refused to show it at all. In later years, when the uncut print resurfaced, people realized how far ahead of its time it was. Beneath the cruelty was a warning about authority gone mad, a theme that echoed through the decade's darker films. It influenced everything from The Devils to The Last House on the Left. By the time it was reissued in the 70s drive-in circuit, it was still getting banned in certain regions, while others hailed it as a masterpiece of historical horror. What began as a condemned film eventually became one of the most respected British horror pictures ever made. The line between exploitation and art had rarely looked thinner. Number 7. Faces of Death, 1978. If you owned a VHS player in the 80s, you probably heard about Faces of Death. This movie was passed around like contraband in schoolyards, always with the same whisper. It's real. That myth made it legendary. The film presented itself as a documentary about mortality blending staged sequences with actual footage of real events. Viewers couldn't tell which was which, and that confusion became its power. The result was a disturbing collection of scenes that looked far too convincing for comfort. Censors didn't hesitate. The United Kingdom declared it illegal to own. Australia, Norway, and New Zealand banned it too. Even in the United States, stores refused to stock it. But like every forbidden movie that only made people more desperate to see it, bootleg tapes spread everywhere, often labeled banned in 40 countries, to boost the thrill. It cost under $500,000 to make and earned more than $30 million worldwide. Critics dismissed it, but its infamy cemented it in pop culture. Ironically, decades later, the special effects team behind its fakest scenes went on to work on major Hollywood productions. Faces of Death proved one thing: people are terrified by what they can't confirm. Number 6. Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS, 1975. This film's reputation preceded it. Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS, was advertised as the most shocking movie ever made, and for many, that was not an exaggeration. Starring Diane Thorne as the ruthless warden of a wartime prison camp, it combined cruelty, revenge, and bizarre pseudoscience in one relentless package. Shot on the leftover sets of the sitcom Hogan's Heroes, it was made fast and cheap, about $150,000, but it exploded into theaters like dynamite. Countries around the world banned it outright, including Australia, Germany, and New Zealand. Critics called it disgraceful. Some of the crew even tried to have their names removed from the credits. Yet it made over $2 million worldwide and spawned sequels that pushed things even further. For fans of exploitation, it became a twisted legend, a film so extreme it became untouchable. Despite its reputation, Ilsa remains a symbol of 70s grindhouse audacity, a reminder of an era when shock was an art form and censorship was the best advertisement. It didn't pretend to be noble or artistic. It was pure provocation, and that's exactly why it made history. Number 5. Thriller, A Cruel Picture, 1973. This Swedish cult classic earned its place among the most banned films ever made. Thriller, A Cruel Picture, also known as They Call Her One Eye, turned revenge into pure rage. It followed a mute young woman who, after years of torment, trained herself into a precision instrument of payback. Director Bo Arne Vibenius knew exactly what he was making: a cold, stylish storm of vengeance designed to shock audiences and sell tickets. He even forced his cast to sign contracts, forbidding them from revealing who really directed it. The tagline promised no limits of evil, and that was accurate. Censors worldwide reacted instantly. Germany, Australia, and the United States all banned it, some refusing to even review it. Yet, the legend grew. Quentin Tarantino later cited it as the main inspiration for Daryl Hannah's character in Kill Bill, calling it the roughest revenge movie ever made. What makes Thriller unforgettable isn't just its brutality, but its eerie calm. The violence is slow, methodical, filmed almost beautifully, an unsettling contrast that made audiences recoil. It was banned for decades, but rediscovered as a strange work of art that blurred the line between shock and cinema. Number 4. I Spit on Your Grave, 1978. Few films split audiences like I Spit on Your Grave. Made by Mir Zarchi on a budget barely big enough to rent a small theater, this movie rewrote what controversial meant. It followed a young writer whose trip to a quiet lakeside town turns into a nightmare. What followed shocked even seasoned critics. Zarchi said he based it on a real incident helping a woman reach a police station after she was attacked and then mistreated by the system. The film was his furious response to cruelty and injustice, but the result was so raw that nearly every country that screened it tried to ban it. Australia, Norway, Ireland, and the United Kingdom all pulled it from shelves. Some stores even destroyed copies. Critics didn't hold back. Roger Ebert famously called it a vile bag of garbage and gave it 0 stars. But while reviewers despised it, audiences couldn't look away. It earned more than $5 million worldwide, an incredible return on a self-financed release that Zarchi personally rented theaters to show. Over time, filmmakers began to see it differently, as a grim but fearless story about survival and retaliation. Like many banned movies of the 70s, its notoriety became its greatest advertisement. I Spit on Your Grave didn't just shock it, rewired how far independent cinema was willing to go. Number 3. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974. This one barely shows any blood, yet it terrified an entire generation. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre was directed by Tobe Hooper on a budget of about $140,000, but it felt real too real. The story followed a group of friends who stumbled upon a family living far beyond the reach of sanity. What made it terrifying wasn't gore, it was the claustrophobia, the constant roar of power tools, and that suffocating heat you could almost feel through the screen. Censors across the world refused to believe it wasn't more graphic than it was. Britain banned it for decades. Some Canadian provinces followed. Even in the United States, the ratings board refused to give it an R rating, effectively blocking its release. Despite everything, it became one of the most profitable independent films ever made, grossing over $30 million in America alone. Critics later called it a masterpiece of controlled terror. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre didn't just start the slasher genre, it redefined horror's boundaries. It proved that imagination was more powerful than special effects, and fear didn't need gallons of fake blood. Sometimes, what you don't see is worse. Number 2. The Last House on the Left, 1972. Before he gave us Freddy Krueger, Wes Craven delivered something far more disturbing. The Last House on the Left looked like a standard thriller about two teenage girls heading to a concert, but then it tore up every rulebook Hollywood had. The movie's raw documentary-like style made audiences feel trapped inside the chaos. There were no cutaways, no escape, just relentless tension. When the girls' parents discover what happened and take matters into their own hands, the story flips into pure primal revenge. Viewers weren't ready. People fainted in theaters. Some stormed out mid-scene. In Britain, censors refused even to rate it. Uncut versions were banned under the video nasties panic for decades, and police in some areas confiscated copies. The uncut version wasn't legally available until the 2000s. Despite the outrage, it became one of the most influential horror films ever made. Craven didn't glamorize anything he showed, the ugliness people prefer to pretend doesn't exist. For all its controversy, The Last House on the Left captured the darker side of the 70s, a world where even the suburbs couldn't keep the horror out. Number 1. The Devils, 1971. There's Band, and then there's The Devils. Directed by Ken Russell, starring Oliver Reed and Vanessa Redgrave, it remains one of the most censored studio films ever made. Based on historical events in 17th century France, it followed a priest accused of witchcraft and the hysteria that consumed an entire town. Warner Brothers financed it, but when the studio saw the finished cut, panic set in. The imagery was too intense, the ideas too fearless. Massive sections were deleted before release, and even then most countries refused to show it. Britain cut it beyond recognition, and in America, theaters screened heavily edited versions. Critics didn't know what to make of it. Some called it blasphemous. Others saw a masterpiece buried under the controversy. Years later, filmmakers like Guillermo del Toro and critics like Mark Kermode praised it as one of the boldest films ever made. To this day, Warner Brothers still refuse to release the fully restored version. Yet, despite decades of suppression, The Devil stands as proof of how powerful cinema can be when it refuses to behave. In an age of copy-paste storytelling, it remains untamed, an artifact of pure artistic defiance. The 1970s were wild, a time when filmmakers weren't afraid to burn every rulebook just to see what would happen. Some of these movies shocked, some inspired, and some were buried for decades before being recognized as art. But together, they changed the conversation about what cinema could show and how far freedom could go. Which of these banned films would you dare to watch? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more cinematic deep dives.